Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Annielytics Podcast. I am Laura Edell. I am a chief data scientist out at Microsoft, and I wanted just to introduce you all to where the name Annielytics came from. A little bit of background, in case you were wondering. Other than it is a very punny pun, Annielytics is really a derivative of just analytics, and it's something that I'm very passionate about. So if you've ever met me, and Shannon can attest to this, the very first thing out of my mouth will be my fantasy football model. It's my badge of pride. And, it was one of those things I built to take my father-in-law down, who said statistics could never win fantasy football. And boy, he was wrong. And so it's evolved throughout my career, starting at Apple when I worked on Siri Generation 1. And it has, migrated its way all the way to where I am today at Microsoft. And so I really welcome you today. And mostly I'm very excited to introduce you to Shannon Kuehn, my guest on today's show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Shannon and I met, what is it now, 3 years ago-ish?
Almost.
Out at one of our conferences at Microsoft. And we met over my World War II propensity to take free Splenda packages off of restaurant bars because I don't like to see things go to waste. It's something my grandmother taught me. And I'm not joking, when I opened up my little satchel of many Splendas that came pouring out, this is how we met.
I think I helped you with additional Splendas. We were trying to come up with the right way to pack the Splendas in. And I think those Splendas last you almost a full year, didn't they?
Oh, they did. And I remember when I ran out, I thought of you. And I asked my partner, and he came back with what is this giant bag of Splenda. And he's like, well, you could package up your own. I'm like, no.
Okay.
So I am really excited. Shannon is one of these tremendous people that isn't just intelligent and isn't just a woman in tech, but she truly embodies everything that is kind in the world today. I mean that genuinely, Shannon. You are one of these people that gives of yourself to anybody who asks, and you do it really without asking for anything in return. And it's one of those beautiful things that I've learned working with you that just shines through. And so thank you so much for just being on this show and for being who you are.
Sure. Well, thank you. And I want to make a note here. I didn't pay Laura to say any of that. So thank you, Laura.
And so, one of the things that I've learned about Shannon and that Shannon's taught me about her, just vast wealth of experience and what she can do in her amazing sort of ninja toolkit is that she's come from a very different background than maybe where she is today. And so, Shannon, I was really hoping you talk to us a little bit about how you ended up at Microsoft. What's your journey been like?
Sure. It's very atypical. And I think I scare some engineers who followed that computer science background. So I went to school for communication studies and English, something that has nothing to do with technology. In fact, if you would have found me in my late teens, I was not a real big fan of technology. I fell in love with DJing. I want to say I was about 20 when I fell in love with DJing. Of course, I had to save and make sure I could handle building out what that was going to look like. And the first handful of troubleshooting tips that I had done, or at least experimented with, was hooking my mixer up to my computer. And I loved that. It was fun. I did it on my own. Now, prior to, I'd always bug my developer friends and they'd always pull my leg and make me do ridiculous things like reboot my computer 25 times in a row. I didn't realize I didn't need to do that. So I got to the point where I finally was able to do that. And then, I found myself kind of helping people out in various roles with technology. So a lot of help desk type things, like my cubicle partner was always having problems with her printer. I fixed that one time and I wasn't even technical at that role, right? I fixed a lot of Palm Pilots in my day, trying to make sure that, commercial real estate brokers can respond to email and be able to do what they need to do. So, I found myself graduating towards more and more technical roles. And then I found my first technical job at the age of 26, so much later in life. And, I even got hired on as an administrative assistant to start. So that firm, I was, still dealing with expense reports, trying to deal with travel, help out with documentation, et cetera. But then they also realized they needed somebody to kind of play point with technology. And over the course of my 8.5 years there, they invested in my education, kind of helped me become the person that I am today. And I kind of grew up and grew into the big kid pants that, you kind of start wearing when you're developing more technical skill.
Yeah.
And so after 8.5 years, I kind of realized I want to do more. Now that I'm at that point of having deeper technical skill, I want to continue to go out there and see what I can find. So I worked at a managed services provider after that job for about a year and a day. I mean, no joke. It was nuts. It was crazy reality. But it was one of those things where I found it ridiculously invaluable because it's almost like drinking from a fire hose. And then I found myself at a Microsoft partner because at some point you become really attracted to certain recruiters online. And then once I was there, the Microsoft partner did a lot of really good video series, blog posts, all kinds of interesting ways of interacting with the community. Microsoft found me. And I still to this day pinch myself. Like every day I wake up, I'm like, I'm still at Microsoft. I'm still doing this really interesting job that I absolutely love, but it's not a typical journey by any stretch of the definition.
So would you say, for folks that are listening to this, that are hearing this and it's really resonating for them, what would you say is that one thing that if you could go back and really advise your former self, like this is what you should do to stick and stay and, maybe navigate that route faster, what would be that piece of advice you would share?
I think I let people convince me I didn't know what I knew. And I wish I wouldn't have had these notions of second guessing myself, right? I really wish I would have persevered. I wish I would have used that as an opportunity to kind of kick my own self in the hind end a little bit. I had to kind of figure that out on my own. And obviously I did at some point because I wouldn't have propelled myself to be at Microsoft. But when I was still kind of stubbing my toe a lot with technology, trying to make things work, especially as I moved from help desk to server admin to Exchange admin and VMware admin and Active Directory admin, there was a lot of stumbling points along the way where I finally realized I knew a lot more than I thought I did. So I would love to go back in time, shake myself a little bit, give myself the kudos of, you know, a lot more than you think you do. But I also don't know if I'd be here today, right? Like who knows?
True. No, it's a very good point. And I think, it does remind me a lot of imposter syndrome. And we talk about it on almost every one of my podcasts. And it's amazing to me in interviewing all these amazing women, how many of us are either, have felt the imposter syndrome or that voice in our head that is really our worst critic. It's us, telling us that we can't do something, we don't know as much. And therefore that leads us into this whole feeling of the imposter syndrome. Yeah. Have you yourself felt the imposter syndrome as you made it through, tech and then where you are today?
Oh, definitely. I used to joke with my previous boss that I don't know if the imposter syndrome ever goes away. Like I'm at Microsoft. It's crazy, right? It's an awesome reality, but I also feel like I think I still have a ever so slight imposter syndrome, but I think that starts to die out the longer you're in a certain role or on a certain team, and you start realizing that people around you maybe aren't as technical or maybe don't have the same skill set, right? So my background being very heavy in communication studies and English, I can write well, I can speak well. So that's a different skill set than a traditional engineer would have. They're very, and it's no discredit to any engineers, but they're more binary. They're more black or white. And I think a lot of the roles out there that really gravitate towards enterprise architecture, dealing more with architect type roles, you need to kind of you don't need to dick. You need to dip in a little bit more to those types of areas, a little bit more on the gray side, like being able to read a room, being able to have a conversation and connect with people. Because I think that's not a normal trait, especially when you think about the way engineers move into more technical roles.
No, absolutely. And it's interesting that you say that because in a lot of the times that we bring engineers in front of customers, even you will see them go in deep into an area of technology that the customer's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. They're using this other language that, yes, they're very intelligent, but that's one of those gifts that I think that soft skill, being able to communicate or the art of communication, whether it's in written form or verbally, I mean, it's transcendent to tech or really any industry. And it is not something you are innately born with. I mean, look at me. I go to you to help me wordsmith stuff all the time because it is a gift that you have.
Well, and I mean, and it's one of those things too. I think people forget the messaging, right? Written text has messaging, right? When you're actually having a conversation with somebody, your nonverbal cues have a message, right? And so I think a lot of what this world needs more of is that better communication. And it's really a soft skill, unfortunately. I wish I could do a whole series on it because I feel like I could teach a lot of people how to be better with working with customers, because I've heard engineers kind of feel frustrated working with customers because they can't really reach that level of them being able to trust the person working with the customer, right? It's super hard and it's a mixed bag. And I try a lot of different things, especially if it's a brand new customer that I'm working with or a brand new person I'm working with, to try and get them to trust me and kind of, sit coach or let me sit coach with them so that we can kind of ride on this ride together. And it's an interesting world because I never really think of myself as an individual person. I always think of myself as part of a team, and I try and figure out ways to bring people together, because I think we all offer unique things. I don't care if you don't know what I know about Azure infrastructure, Laura. And I think likewise, you don't care that I don't know what you know about machine learning. I think, we've got a good rapport enough where if I were to come to you and I'd say, hey, I've got a couple of questions, which I did when we were on the same team, and you just dropped everything and you were like, let me know, this is my schedule. This is where I can be available and be helpful. And I think it's just kind of, knowing when to say you don't have to be the expert. You don't have to know every little thing, right? It's being able to expand and land, so to speak.
And that's a really fine balance. And so first, I just want to touch on, to your point about working as a team, your nickname Shan's Hands came about. You claimed to have never played craps in Vegas before. And
yes, I didn't.
Was like the luckiest thrower. I mean, I would try to throw the dice and I'd throw them off the table to where the pit boss thought I was up to some hijinks. She, on the other hand, would throw and she was like, I don't know what I'm doing every time, and it would hit. And I mean, it was great.
For 40 plus minutes rolling. And that's not I found that out. That's not a normal thing when you're playing craps.
No, but that is true. That personifies you to a T. Is that you come, and whether you're in a meeting or you're at a craps table, people, you immediately have that trust that people want to, resonate towards you. And so, in thinking about, folks that are young in their career who have the imposter syndrome, who feel very intimidated, I look at you and I you'll say to me like, oh, I'm not sure if I know as much about X, but I'll see you in a room and you just really hold their attention. Or I look at you in your new webcasts or the work that you're doing to evangelize in your new role, and you immediately, embolden this knowledge that people immediately trust. How would you advise others, that are younger in their career, how to have that confidence, even if they don't on the inside, but really how to project that confidence outwards?
So prior to college, even, I was involved in forensics, right, which is speech team. I did a little bit of debate as well. So I learned a lot of how to deliver messages by literally standing in front of a mirror and watching yourself. It's the most humbling experience. It's a little bit awkward, especially if you've never done it. You're like, gosh, I look like this when I'm talking to somebody. But it's an interesting reality because it helps you slow down. And then also recording yourself goes even farther. So I get excited. I still to this day, when I see you, Laura, and we haven't seen each other for a long time because of COVID, but when we'd hang out, we just and I have to remember that when I'm in front of a room of people or I'm having a conversation with somebody in the broader community, it counts to slow down and enunciate. And so I think, if you are finding yourself in a role where you're doing more speaking in front of groups of people, slowing down, recording yourself, talking in front of a mirror to yourself, which does seem quite silly, but it's really impactful. All of that starts to help. Plus finding mentors, right? Finding people who have no problem giving you blunt feedback. One of my coaches in high school, he used to tell me I absolutely sucked. And there were times he would just leave the room and I'm like, what did I miss? And he'd come back and he'd be like, why do you think I left the room? And I had to really think about it more and more, because when you're more conscious about the way you're delivering messages, you'll deliver it a little bit better and more effective. And I think that's a lot of what doesn't really show itself well with engineers, unfortunately, because you're trying to figure out how to do a for each loop correctly, or you're trying to figure out how to call upon a class correctly instead of whatever you're programming, right? Or whatever machine learning model you're trying to build, right? You're trying to figure out, how do I build this to actually generate the right kind of data to understand certain things about what we're trying to cover, right? So I think, remembering that we're all people, right? And we want to be talked to like we're a person. I would never presuppose you knew half of what I knew about Azure and vice versa. And if you were ever interested, I would never have a problem breaking it down to you too, because
I didn't even know Azure was a cloud at Microsoft when I interviewed, but that's
how did you get hired, Laura?
That's how good I am at my job and what I do.
Wow.
It was
See, there you go. But
on the fly. No, I told them that in the interview. I was very Apple friendly, so I came in with a chip on my shoulder at my interview, and Tom, my Xbox, will laugh about, by the way, what's Azure? I hadn't even done my homework. I mean, that's bad. Those people are listening, that is not what to do when you're preparing for an interview. But that was the arrogant mindset I have. And, we were talking in one of my most recent podcasts about the younger generation and how to really impact them. And, one of the great things my guest was talking about is that if they just listened more, and not just listen, but actively were interested in that person, ask questions about them. And then that's something I don't see a lot, where you take that, active involvement. how is your family doing? How are you doing? Just that 2 minutes to connect on a human level. And I think to your point, oftentimes when we go in front of presentations, we forget that it is human. Like you said, they are just people out there and they want to hear a story. They want a story to be told to. That is what human nature wants to listen to. So,
Right.
when you go into your conferences and you're preparing, it's a very, very technical, audience. How do you break it down in your head to make it fun? I do quirky things like rap battles between Siri and Cortana. But what do you do to really make your audience feel comfortable and listening to the content you have?
Oh, I try to crack like really lame jokes. Like they could be dad jokes, but usually they're like more technical in nature. And so I never have a problem making a pun or cracking a joke or trying to get people to kind of laugh. And then I always like the Q&A because I feel like the Q&A brings about certain people who feel confident to ask a question. It brings about a certain level of personality that you may not have gotten 100% with the whole message. But to your point, so one of the big areas I studied in college was interpersonal communication. And really what it hits home on is the fact that not everybody's an extrovert. And so one of the things that I've worked on with engineers who've come to me who want to become more of an architect, want to become more of that soft skill, or at least have a proficiency with some soft skills, they'll ask me things like, how do you get to that point? And it really very much so is asking questions of whomever you're talking to, because it makes that person feel like they are a person and they're not just somebody you're trying to do business with or get a project done or something of that sort, right? So
Yeah.
really connecting with people is important. And I think you're right. I don't think we listen enough and I don't think we ask enough questions because, like you and I, if we schedule time, we at least bake at least 10 minutes on the front or on the end for a how are you doing, what's going on with your life, like da 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 da, because that's important and that's how you continue to build your networks.
No, it's very valid. And I think to that point on networking, one of the things that I would tell my, younger self is, I was an introverted extrovert. I know it seems maybe hard, but it's more natural for
I
me.
can't believe I can't
I'm
believe
an only child though. So, we have to
true.
live with ourselves. So, the voices are still there, yak, yak. But, at the end of the day, it made me self-sufficient and reliant. However, now where I am today, I wish I could go back and say, stop being so quiet. At these networking events, I would be so terrified. I knew nobody. I told the story about when I was 22 to 4-ish, and I went to the CFO magazine conference, and I was a speaker, and I'm wearing the Elwood's pink suit, and I come down this escalator of all navy blue CFOs, and I'm like, what am I going to tell this audience that they care anything about? And I was put in the happy hour reception time slot too. And so everyone's mingling, and here I am talking about something to do with an algorithm in this like little tiny voice. And, at the end of the day, I wish I could have just told myself that in that session, just own what you know. And if you're invited to speak there, it's for a reason. And B, afterwards, I wanted to run to my room. And had I not been stopped by the one of maybe 6 people who attended and told, that was very good, here's your gold star, which I actually really appreciated, but I was mortified. Like I didn't know I didn't know how to network. Would you say networking is one of those things that you find very vital to the success of your career? Because that's what I see outside looking in on your career is networking has been tremendous.
Yeah, so it's a matter of establishing those relationships with people, right? Because you never know where you're going to wind up. You never know if you're ever going to work with that person again. So it's a matter of making sure you don't burn bridges, making sure that you build that person up as much as possible and you work together as a team as much as possible. You're never going to get along with everybody. Gosh, I wish you would. We wouldn't have half the problems we do in this world, right? So you have to figure out how to make the best of the time you have with whatever person you're working with, right? And I always strive to build that person up as best as possible. And then in turn, it's been a mixed bag on if they do it back. And I largely just attribute it to this person's a lot more of a binary engineer, or this person understands that this relationship's important. And so, it's really a big part of trying to move yourself forward is to make sure you have the right networking connections and that you've got the right people involved, because I found my current job randomly. I wasn't looking for it. And it was one of those things where because of all the networking I had done and all of the different connections I had built over my course of time being at Microsoft, that's what became kind of a recommendation for me with my current manager. And it was kind of a crazy reality, like to actually realize that my networking had done me that great of a service to be recommended by multiple people to my current manager. And I'm like, I must be doing something right.
You're being humble. I'm going to humble brag for you, and then we're going to have to wrap it down. Our final question. I mean, she was sought after for this role. It's one of the most coveted roles at Microsoft because basically you get to be the evangelist in a pre-COVID world, traveling the world. I know you've missed out on some opportunities to go to England and some other amazing countries. You know, not that the virtual isn't also equally, you know, reaching out, but you know, the perks aren't quite the same.
It's definitely different, but I think the reality is I enjoy the fact of being able to make these connections with people that I wouldn't have had a chance to prior to this role.
So just to round out this session that has been actually just like talking to you on the phone, which is so enjoyable, I want to ask you, so we were having that birthday party of yours that we had to cancel from COVID, and you had to invite two people, either dead or alive, either actual or fictional. Who would those two people be and why?
Gosh, you know, I think it would be both my grandmas. I was very close with both of them, and I don't think I really appreciated what I had with them while they were alive. Unfortunately, I think that's true of a lot of people. And as I've gotten older, I think they would both be tickled that I'd want to, you know, have them come and hang out with me, and I'd be so excited to bring them into my life. You know, I think they would just be so like, oh, of course, I don't know if they would have come to Chicago. I may have had to go all the way back home to Nebraska, where I'm from, but still, the idea that I would have wanted to seek them out and just have some genuine and unique conversations that only they were able to provide, right? Because they're a different generation. They grew up in the Great Depression. They saw World War II. They saw, you know, a lot of different changes over the course of the time that they were alive. And I feel like if they were still alive, they'd be a little blown away by how much technology is kind of seeping in. It doesn't really matter if you are an awesome, amazing technologist or if you're just getting started. There's all different walks of life. And I think they'd be super tickled by that. And then super just blown away that I would be like, let's go seek my grandmas out and let's go have some conversations with them. They'd be like, oh.
And is that delightful? So mind you, the language that Shannon uses between just saying tickled and delightful, that just makes my day. So thank you for saying tickled. And by the way, my last guest also talked a lot about you know, sitting down and talking to the previous generation and having those conversations that we just don't do anymore. And, you know, I'm fascinated by when I find out someone was in World War II. I mean, I just told you a Splenda story that was World War II inspired. I mean, this is a world we just don't understand. So I think you're absolutely right. We need to ask more of those who, you know, come before us because they know so much more than we do.
Totally. And I think it offers up a unique perspective on things. Like I did real quick, I'll tell you about this because it was kind of cool. In high school, we had to go interview both sets of grandparents talking about World War II. And it was a cool, unique experience that I found. So I moved recently, I found all of the info that I had recorded. So I found the tape and everything I had written up. And it was this interesting reality to say, gosh, I didn't even, you know, plan for this like my teacher did. And I like wrote my teacher a message. And it's just super, super cool to kind of see all that come together. And it's one of those things where I feel like, you know, had I not had that opportunity, I probably would have missed out. And so now I've got a kind of a living piece of that history with me the rest of my life.
No, you do. And I think that's brilliant. So I'm going to use that to then round out. Shannon, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I'm really excited that you shared a very different view than we've had before, just to show, you know, those that are listening that you can really start anywhere and make your career into tech. So thank you. And thank you, listeners, for listening to the Annielytics Podcast. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Laura.